So, when we picture scientific discovery, we usually imagine something like, Archimedes in the bathtub.
Right, sitting there, water spilling over the edge.
Yeah, he shouts, Eureka! And suddenly the science just magically happens. But if Archimedes had to pass Lecture 14 of the basic course in biomedical research, he'd quickly figure out that the bathtub is really just like step 4 of a meticulously charted Gantt sequence.
Exactly. It's not magic, it's project management.
Right. So today, we are tearing through the essential multiple-choice questions for your upcoming exam on study plan and project management. We're basically your study buddies for this deep dive.
Because memorizing a dry list of correct options right before a test, I mean, it might get you a passing grade if you're really lucky.
Maybe.
But understanding the underlying logic of why those answers are right, well, that's what actually makes you a competent researcher. The examiners aren't just testing your memory here.
No, they're definitely not.
They want to know if you understand the rigorous mechanics of how an idea actually becomes a credible scientific study.
Exactly. And the goal here isn't just to read you the bolded answer. It's to break down the mechanism behind it so it actually sticks in your brain. No unnecessary filler, just the high-yield concepts. We're pulling strictly from your source stack, specifically looking at questions 1 through 8 and questions 22 through 29.
Right, so let's get into it.
Yeah, let's start by building the foundation. Because every project has to start with a blueprint, right? And the examiners clearly want to test whether you understand the exact chronological sequence of that blueprint.
Which is a trap for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. It's like going grocery shopping without a list. You end up with a cart full of expensive random ingredients, but, no actual dinner. So if we look at question 4 and question 23, they both attack this exact same concept, the life cycle of a study.
Yeah, question 4 asks the correct sequence outright, and question 23 asks you to sequence 4 specific steps.
So what's the verdict?
So for question 4, the correct sequence is C, identifying data needs, spelling out research question, formulating study objectives, planning analysis. And then for question 23, the correct sequence is BIT3-4, which essentially translates to developing the research question, planning the data analysis, data collection, and finally, data analysis.
Okay, let's pause on that because as someone looking at general project management, this sequence feels entirely counterintuitive to me.
How so?
Well, why on earth are we planning the analysis before we collect the data? Like, my instinct would be to gather as much data as possible from the field, see what information we actually have, and then figure out the best statistical method to analyze it.
Right, and that instinct is exactly what the examiners are preying on. It's a fatal error in biomedical research.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Planning the analysis must happen before data collection. If you don't do this, you risk spending months and, honestly, hundreds of thousands of grant dollars collecting the entirely wrong type of data.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Imagine you're testing a new intervention to lower blood pressure, right? You decide to just collect data first. So you send out a survey asking patients a simple yes or no question. Did your blood pressure go down?
Okay.
You get thousands of yes and no answers. That's categorical data.
Right, but when I sit down to actually analyze the efficacy of that intervention, my statistician is going to look at me and say, they needed continuous data.
Exactly.
They needed the exact systolic and diastolic numbers to run, like a proper paired t-test or a regression model, to show the actual degree of change, not just a binary yes or no.
Precisely. Because you didn't plan the analysis first, you collected data that's basically useless for the statistical rigor required to prove your hypothesis.
Yeah.
The analysis dictates the data collection tools. Always.
So you have to know exactly what mathematical lock you're trying to open before you spend a year forging the key.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah. Man, that reframes the entire process. The end goals strictly dictate the immediate actions, which brings us perfectly to the objectives themselves. We have question 1, asking when objectives should be defined, and question 6, asking what best describes them.
Right. So for question 1, the answer is A, objectives should be defined at the planning stage of study.
Not halfway through.
Definitely not halfway through, and definitely not retroactively when you start writing the paper, which happens more often than you'd think, right at the beginning.
Mm.
And for question 6, the correct answer is D, A, and B. Meaning they should be minimum, achievable, and clear. And they could be primary and or secondary.
Let's connect that phrase for a second, minimum, achievable, and clear, to question 26, because this is a true or false statement. Framing several study objectives improves the study planning and management.
Yeah.
Now, I've noticed a lot of early career researchers fall into this trap where they want to solve like 5 different problems with one study to make their grant proposal look more impressive.
You want to be ambitious.
Exactly. But the correct answer here is B, false.
It is definitively false, because every single objective you add geometrically increases the logistical complexity of your project. It's not just adding one more sentence to your proposal.
Right. It ripples out.
Yeah. Let's say you're studying a diabetes drug. Your primary objective is to track HbA1c levels. That's clear. But then you decide to add a secondary objective about tracking patient sleep quality.
Which sounds nice on paper.
Sure. But adding that objective means you need a new variable, which requires a completely different measurement tool like sleep monitors, which might suddenly mean your sample size needs to be expanded to achieve statistical power for that new variable.
Oh, geez.
And that balloons your budget, your staff requirements, and your timeline.
So it's less like adding a leather interior to a car and more like trying to build a car that also functions as an airplane and an espresso machine.
Yeah, the entire underlying engineering just gets compromised.
Yeah.
You want a study that does one thing perfectly, not 5 things poorly. Keep your objectives minimal and ruthlessly focused on your primary question.
Because if your study collapses under its own weight, it really doesn't matter how ambitious it was to begin with.
Exactly.
And that focused objective then acts as the deciding factor for how the study is physically built, which is exactly what question 27 gets at. It says, state whether true or false. Selection of study design should be related to the objectives. And the answer is A, true.
Because the study design is merely the vehicle you're using to reach your destination. If your objective is to simply understand the prevalence of a rare disease in a specific city at this exact moment in time, a cross-sectional survey is the right vehicle.
Right.
But if your objective is to prove that a specific chemical exposure actively causes that disease over a 10-year period, a survey is the wrong vehicle entirely. You need a cohort study. The objective always dictates the design.
Okay, so the objective is the destination, and the design is just the vehicle we choose to get there. That makes it very clear. But let's move into the next phase. We've mapped out this brilliant, focused objective. In the real world, how do we actually measure our progress without just guessing? Because the examiners know this translation from abstract goal to concrete measurement is a major stumbling block, which is why they test it in question 2.
Right. Question 2.
Which of the following is or are required to determine the key indicators for planned research study?
The correct answer here is D, all of the above, meaning you need to frame study objectives, identify parameters needed for the key indicators, and choose the right study design.
So the indicators don't just exist in a vacuum. They are essentially birthed by the objectives we just spend all that time defining.
That is the crucial conceptual link to make for this exam. You cannot know what to measure if you don't know what your ultimate goal is. Let's trace the path, right? Let's say your objective is to evaluate a new community weight loss intervention. The parameter you're interested in might be body mass. But the key indicator, the actual metric your entire team will track to determine success or failure, might be the average percentage change in body mass index over a strict 6-month period.
Ah, got it.
The objective creates the parameter, which creates the indicator.
Which means I now have to deploy my team to physically collect that BMI data from hundreds of people. And that process of data collection is heavily regulated by the rules outlined in question 7 and question 25.
Yes, both of these deal with the principles of collecting information elements.
So what are the examiners actually looking for here?
For both question 7 and question 25, the answer is D, all of the above. For question 7, that means you must use variables that best reflect the information element, adopt standardized case definitions, and choose the most accurate ways of collecting information.
And question 25?
Question 25 reiterates this exact same priority. Use variables that best reflect the element, use standardized case definitions, and use validated and standardized methods.
Notice how the phrase standardized case definitions shows up in both of those questions. That's clearly a massive priority for the exam. But let's look at the mechanism behind why. If I'm running a multi-center trial across different states, why is it so catastrophic if one clinic defines a variable slightly differently than another?
I mean, they're all still doing science, right?
Well, they might be doing science, but they aren't doing the same science.
No.
Without standardized definitions, the data can never be aggregated or compared. Think about building a massive skyscraper, but every single contractor on the site uses their own personal, subjective definition of what an inch is.
That sounds like a disaster.
It is. The steelworker thinks an inch is this big. The drywall installer thinks it's a little smaller, the plumber just sort of eyeballing it based on experience.
Yeah, the plumbing wouldn't align with the walls, the steel framing wouldn't match the foundation, the whole structure would be physically impossible to assemble, no matter how skilled the individual workers are. And that is exactly what happens to a clinical trial. Suppose you're studying clinical depression across 5 different research sites. If Site A defines depression based on a strict score of 10 on the patient health questionnaire, but Site B defines it as a score of 15, and Site C defines it just based on a doctor's subjective handwritten notes.
Your data is complete garbage.
Exactly. You cannot run a statistical analysis on it because an inch at Site A is fundamentally different from an inch at Site C. You must adopt a universally standardized case definition before you collect a single piece of information.
Wow, okay. So standardizing the variables is the only way to ensure the data can actually communicate across different environments. That completely tracks. Now, even with a perfect blueprint, standardized variables, and a clear sequence, the project still has to survive contact with reality, right?
Sadly, yes.
This is where we move from theory into the actual project management side of things, the logistics.
Which is where a shocking number of mathematically sound studies actually fall apart.
Yeah.
They fail not because the underlying science is bad, but because the execution is mismanaged.
Let me present a realistic scenario here, because question 8 addresses studies conducted with an ad hoc approach, meaning, a sort of make it up as you go or highly improvised methodology.
Right.
The correct answer for what this leads to is C, serious difficulties in analysis and interpretation. But let's look at a clinical setting. Patient populations are incredibly unpredictable. We just lived through a global pandemic where researchers had to pivot daily just to keep their trials alive.
Sure.
Doesn't an ad hoc approach sometimes provide the necessary adaptability to survive real-world chaos? How does the exam reconcile real-world adaptability with this strict rule against ad hoc methods?
It's a really vital distinction to make. Adaptability means having contingency plans built within a structured protocol. Ad hoc means lacking a protocol entirely.
Ah, I see.
If you're constantly improvising your inclusion criteria or changing your dosages on the fly because you didn't plan for predictable supply chain bottlenecks, you aren't being adaptable. You're introducing massive confounding variables into your study.
And that brings us right back to the analysis problem from the very beginning of our discussion.
Exactly. If you ad hoc your data collection, your statistician cannot separate the actual effect of the medical intervention from the noise of your improvised methodology. Did the patient get better because of the drug or because you randomly changed how you administered it halfway through the trial? You can't know.
You're flying blind.
Completely. Which leads directly into question 22. Which of the following is a reason for the failure of a study?
Based on what we've seen so far about systemic failures, I'm assuming the answer encompasses all of these logistical breakdown?
Yes, the answer is D, all the above. A poorly stated research question, an unrealistic timeline, and inadequate supervision. The exam is testing a fundamental mindset shift here. Research is not just intellectual academic work, it's a grueling operational logistics project. Failing to supervise your field workers to ensure they're following the standardized case definitions, or setting a timeline that ignores the reality of how hard patient recruitment actually is, will kill your study just as effectively as a flawed hypothesis.
So we have to manage the operational side just as rigorously as the clinical side. To that end, I have 2 questions that test the boundaries of that management. Question 3 asks, what improves the efficiency of a research study? And question 5 asks what the products or deliverables of a project should be bounded by.
Both answers are D, all of the above. For question 3, efficiency is improved by time management, planning and scheduling activities, and budgeting.
Makes sense.
And for question 5, deliverables must be bound by a defined time frame, a defined budget, and expected quality standards. This is basically the classic project management triangle: time, cost, and quality.
Which makes logical sense for any project. But here is where the exam throws a fantastic curveball, and it's honestly one of the most important concepts in this whole unit.
Oh, I know the one.
Yeah. Question 24, which of the following factor is not essential for effective planning and management of a study?
The answer is C, reduction of sample size. This is an absolutely critical rule to understand, and examiners love to test it because it catches people off guard.
Let's work through the logic on this, because my instinct as a project manager, if I'm running out of grant money and I'm 6 months behind schedule, is to look for the biggest cost center.
Naturally.
If I initially plan to test 1,000 patients, but I only have the budget and time left to test 400, Shrinking my sample size solves both my budget crisis and my timeline crisis instantly.
Hmm.
Why does the exam flag this as a fatal management error?
Because while reducing the sample size solves your logistical problem, it actively destroys the science.
Yeah.
You have to remember the concept of statistical power.
Right.
During your blueprint phase, you used a specific mathematical formula to calculate the exact minimum number of participants required to prove your hypothesis with statistical significance, while minimizing the risk of a false positive or a false negative.
So if the math says I absolutely need 800 people to prove this drug works, and I only test 400 because I mismanaged the budget.
Then your study entirely loses its statistical power. You might see a positive trend in those 400 patients, but the mathematical confidence interval will be too wide.
The margins are too blurry.
Exactly. The scientific community will look at your data and say, well, this isn't conclusive. This could just be random chance. By arbitrarily cutting the sample size to save time, you haven't managed the project effectively. You've simply spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce a study that proves absolutely nothing.
That is a brilliant clarification. You can manage the catering budget, you can renegotiate the timeline with your funding agency, you can reduce the number of secondary objectives, but the sample size math is sacred. It is non-negotiable.
Exactly. And speaking of the unglamorous side of logistics, let's look at question 28. A postgraduate wants to do a community-based thesis. Which of the following is a part of the planning and program management of the study?
The pattern holds. I'm going to guess it encompasses the entire scope of work.
The answer is indeed D, all the above. But look closely at the specific options the examiners chose to include: calculating sample size, writing the thesis, and arranging transport to the community.
Arranging transport. That feels remarkably mundane to include on an advanced biomedical research exam.
But it's the daily reality of fieldwork. You can have a Nobel-worthy protocol, but if you forget to secure the vans, hire the drivers, and calculate the fuel budget to get your phlebotomist out to the rural clinic on time, your study fails on day one.
Yeah.
Project management encompasses the high-level statistics, but it also encompasses the ground-level reality of making sure there's gas in the car.
Science is renting vans. I think that needs to be framed on the wall of every research lab.
I'd buy that poster.
Okay, final question for this review, question 29. Which of the following can be used to represent the duration, timeline, and sequence of activities and milestones of a research project?
This is a specific visual tool you absolutely need to memorize. The answer is C, Gantt chart.
Now, a lot of people just use standard to-do lists or maybe a shared digital calendar for their projects. What's the actual mechanism behind a Gantt chart that makes it the superior choice for representing duration, timeline, and sequence?
Well, a standard to-do list just tells you what needs to be done. A Gantt chart maps dependencies.
Dependencies.
Yeah. Imagine a grid. On the vertical axis on the left, you list every single task in your project: getting ethics committee approval, ordering chemical reagents, training your field staff, recruiting patients. On the horizontal axis, you have time, broken down into weeks or months.
Okay, picture it.
You draw horizontal bars for each task to show how long they take. But the magic of the Gantt chart is that it visually links sequential tasks together.
So it visually demonstrates that task C cannot possibly begin until task B is completed.
Exactly. You physically cannot start recruiting patients until the ethics approval bar finishes. A regular calendar just shows you due dates. A Gantt chart shows you the entire cascading sequence of your project at a single glance. It allows you to instantly identify where a seemingly minor 2-week delay in ordering lab supplies will cascade and push back your entire 6-month clinical trial.
So if you see the words timeline, duration, and sequence grouped together on the exam, your brain should immediately lock onto the Gantt chart as the tool that manages all three simultaneously.
Without hesitation. It's the ultimate roadmap for holding all of these disparate logistical and scientific elements together in a way that prevents the ad hoc chaos we talked about earlier.
Well, if you are listening to this right before your exam, congratulations. You've just blasted through the core logic of Lecture 14. We've tackled the essential MCQs, moving from the conceptual necessity of planning your analysis first to the sacred nature of statistical sample sizes, all the way down to mapping task dependencies on a Gantt chart and making sure the vans are rented.
The overarching theme to remember when you sit down for the test is that project management is not administrative busy work. The logistics are the science.
Yeah.
Defining minimal focused objectives, standardizing your definitions so your data can actually communicate, and resisting the urge to ad hoc your methodology. These are the protective mechanisms that ensure your research actually generates truth rather than just generating noise.
It's a rigid structure, but it's rigid to protect the integrity of the discovery, which actually leaves us with a broader concept to chew on, even outside the strict context of a biomedical exam.
Right. Think of the golden rule we established at the very beginning of this session. You must plan your analysis and know exactly what you are looking for before you collect a single piece of data.
Yeah.
How might applying that rigorous principle change the way we consume information in our everyday lives?
Yeah.
When we're trying to navigate a complex political issue or evaluating a new health trend on social media, do we tend to just gather a mountain of random facts, videos, and articles, and then try to ad hoc a conclusion based on whatever we find?
Usually, yes. We collect the noise and hope the signal just magically appears out of it.
But what if we clearly defined the specific question we are trying to answer and the criteria we need to satisfy it before we ever started scrolling? We might find that a lot of the research we do every day is actually just collecting categorically useless data.
A sobering thought to take with you the next time you open a browser window to go down a rabbit hole. Good luck on the exam, remember your sequence, protect your sample size, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.